Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Ain't Gonna Be No Stupid. I'm here with Eric Kallenborn. He is a colleague of mine. What I know about you, Eric, I'm going to try to do my best. I checked out your website. You are the Other Comic Teacher, which is really rich website. If you guys can check it out. He also, here's what else I know about you. Again, teachers don't really hang out, right? Unless you're friends, or teachers don't really have time throughout the day to even talk. Right? We don't have a time for real conversation. Even in meetings, we don't have much time to talk. So here's what I know about you. I know you love shoes. There's something you do on Friday with new shoes. And also you bring donuts to school. And my stupid story has something to do with that. But if you could do a better job of letting us know, I know you are a world, like you traveled all over the country teaching about comics and you're a vegan, and we're going to talk about a lot of things. And that's why we titled this Ain't Gonna Fit in One Niche, or niche, as we say, because we can't decide on just one topic. So if you could I'm going to throw it to you before I tell my stupid story. If you have anything you'd like to say that's probably better than I've just done here.
Well, thanks. First of all, thanks for having me on here. This is going to be a lot of fun. That was a lot you just threw at me right there. So step back and take that all in. Donut Fridays have been a thing for a while, although, man, there's so much to unpack in everything you just said about me. So it is true. I travel for the past 10 years. I've been traveling the country talking about the good news of comics and graphic novels in the classroom. I'm part of a teacher cohort called Lit X, and we basically put together programming for conventions, both Comic-Con and educational conferences, about the importance of teaching with the X's, like all literacies. So we focus on comics and video games and movies and music, and it's just all pop culture related things that you can teach with. We focus on that. The donut and the shoe thing. Yeah, I was a budding sneakerhead, and I would try to wear a new pair of shoes every Friday to see how long I could during the school year. But now that I have become vegan, I've really kind of cut back on the idea of consuming leather. And the donuts that I would bring to school on Fridays had, that they have animal products in them. So I'm really trying not to support those industries when I can either, which sucks. It's a whole nother can of worms. But local businesses that really just make their money off butter and milk, I can't support those things as much as I used to as well. So yes, I would like to bring donuts, but I think I'm going to have to find the vegan donut, there's a lot of places popping up these days that have those options for people now. So yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell. I've been teaching for about 15, 16 years now. After 10, 15 years, you just kind of lose track of just a chunk of time, right?
I'm in year 30, and I took I tried to quit teaching twice. It didn't work. I'm back. I'm still here. I'm going to tell a stupid story, but do you remember when I was a size 29? I'm going to talk in male sizes, a size 29 in February, and now I'm back up to a 33. And it all happened within 1 month. It happened in March when we went back into remote teaching, right? Or we went first time into remote. And it wasn't even anything that I ate. It was more the cortisol levels and stress. And we're talking about veganism, and I found that is going to help with cortisol, lowering my cortisol. But I remember you came over every Friday. You're coming with that donut. In my head, I'm like, here he comes with that donut. So no. And then sugar is a temptation for me, huge, because I've taken pretty much every vice out of my life. Even quit drinking a couple years ago because of inflammation. And I'm like, okay, here come the donuts. And then you came to me one time and I said, get thee behind me, Satan. And if you know in the Bible, that's what Jesus said to Satan when he was trying to tell him, he was fasting and he was trying to say, so he told him that. So I hope you know that I didn't call you particularly Satan. I was just trying to ward off the temptation.
I understand. Completely understand.
Forgive me for that. Another story, my first 3 years of teaching is I taught S.E.L to Spanish speakers in Los Angeles. It was my first 3 years. And I remember going to thrift stores and grabbing as many comics as I could. And I remember I got a lot of eyebrows, raised eyebrows about it. And I'm sure even to this day, are you finding that you also have pushback when you try to incorporate a graphic novel into a classroom?
I've been very lucky with the amount of support that I've gotten over the years with comics and graphic novels. And I will say there is a difference. We can talk about that if you want to.
Yeah, sure.
the medium between like comics and graphic novels. Like there are industry kind of differences between those things and the classifications. My first job was so I worked I student taught at one school, and I really wanted to work in that district, but they didn't have a job open. So I took 2 years at another district teaching English high school. And then I came back to the district I student taught in. But for those 2 years, where I kind of cut my teeth on teaching, that administration was like, you will not use comics or graphic novels, because I wanted to try it. And the department chair was like, nope, there's no room in these classes for comics or graphic novels at all. Like that is not, those aren't real books. And there's nothing I could do about it. I was a first, second year teacher. I had administration who was, and that was a huge school district. We're talking about over 4,000 students. So even as a teacher, I felt a little bit like a number. So you don't want to ruin. And as an English teacher, I mean, like at that time, English teachers are like a dime a dozen. To have an English teaching job was like, oh man, I kind of lucked out. And you don't want to ruin that. So I just kind of went with the status quo, and I taught the curriculum. And then I moved over to the other school district that I spent so far the majority of my teaching career at. And it was all just like, we believe in you, we trust you, you do you, this is what you need to do, let us know what you want. And then I just kind of like ran with it. I've never had a parent complaint. The exact opposite. Parents are like, thank you for introducing my student to something that they love to read. Thank you for like allowing them to now want to read more books and find more things to read. Some people call comics and graphic novels like a gateway to literacy, but I think there's so much more than that, right? It's not just a gateway, it's also a form of literacy. The vocabulary in a graphic novel, like rare words per thousand, the percentage in a graphic novel is higher than in like a college level book. So if you're talking about just vocab words in print, you're seeing a lot of high level words in comics and graphic novels. So I've never really seen a lot of pushback. Now, some of my colleagues, that's a different story. And as you know, in English departments all over the country, there's like 2 major school of thoughts. You have the relatively like outside of the box, hippy dippy sort of like me teacher. And then you'll have a teacher who was like, if you use a comma wrong, you're failing this class. Yes. Those are like the 2 English teachers. So you get the hippy dippy, I'm going to try all these things and get in touch with our feelings. And you tell them, hey, there's this graphic novel. Some of those classic teachers, like I still know teachers to this day that think it would be just an awful idea to use a Shakespeare graphic novel to teach Hamlet or Romeo and Juliet. And I don't like, I think that's just.
Well, Hamlet and Romeo and Juliet were never designed to be taught anyway, right? They were designed to be performed and you watch as an audience, right? So you mentioned a couple things, like talk about unpacking a lot. You mentioned feelings, hippy dippy and feelings, and kids' engagement and kids wanting to read and parents thanking you. Would you say, I guess one thing I realize, I don't think that people understand how much English, teaching English, is social emotional learning experience. Don't you find that we do more with social emotional just by teaching literature, and then through these graphic novels, there's a safety in talking about difficult subjects?
100%. I think we're lucky to have that. I think us in social studies, right? We're the 2 disciplines that probably have that opportunity the most, where social studies comes into the more of the realistic, historical, like social, this is what's happening socially. Mm-hmm. When we get into teaching any book that's fiction or nonfiction, we're talking about analyzing words that indicate tone and mood, which tone and mood are feelings, right? Mm-hmm. How is the author, how are you feeling? I mean, like those words are in the definition of those literary terms. Yes. So to not talk about those things is just silly. So yeah, we have the wonderful opportunity to allow students to really get into how they feel about situations and thoughts that they might not have had an opportunity to get into before our class.
I love that. I also, don't you find that we have so much more standardized testing now? And as a result of that, that takes away a lot of instructional time. So with graphic novels, you're able to dive in to a variety of content and more content when our evaluation system became about student growth. I can tell you my students grow. You don't need a test to show that, right? And I know even during remote learning, my students have grown. So I just think about what is it with the graphic novel that, or versus the comic book and the perception still? Can you talk a little bit more about the difference between the two of those?
I can, and I can also respond to that idea of like, and when we process images way faster than we process words, just in our brains. So when you see a page that has, you know, if you think of like, let's just throw Jane Eyre out as an example, and you see a page from Jane Eyre, and maybe that page, 3 pages, is describing what this room looks like, and the drapes, and how, you know, the ornamentality of it all, if that's even a word. And then you can do that all in 2 panels of a comic book or a graphic novel. You don't have to describe every single gold layer or cup that's on a shelf, because it's there in the panel. And if you take the time to look at that page, you're going to get all of those things. It's not going to be, granted, the words that are describing it in your head are going to be different than the words that were in the traditional prose book, but it's all there. So we can read those things way quicker. I did an experiment once where I took a couple classic works of literature that I had never read before, one of them being Moby Dick, which is an 800-page book. And I read the graphic novel adaptations of those books. And then I went to SparkNotes and took the quiz to see how well I would do on the quiz. And in all of the graphic novel adaptations that I had read of classic works of literature that I had never read before, I got at least a 75 to 80% on every one of those quizzes just from reading the graphic novel. And if I were to write an essay on that book, I would kill that essay. I would kill it.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, and we're talking about like the quizzes, just multiple choice stuff. I could talk about that book, you know, Socratic seminars or in essays. Yeah. The difference between, I'm sorry, getting off a little topic there.
No.
The difference between like comics and graphic novels, if you want to get into that for a second, just briefly. So comics are generally considered the paperback, the floppy paperback issues that come out weekly, monthly. However, although comics is a medium, like comics you can say is a medium, sequential art is another term that people use to describe comics. I think sequential art might be that term you're looking for. Somebody was looking for a higher term to use for the word comics, but it kind of is sequential art. And then graphic novels are when those comics get either bound into a collection, or when an artist or an author makes a book, a larger book to publish, rather than the single issue floppy comics. You would consider those a graphic novel.
Can I circle back to what you said about like the opening of Jane Eyre and reading? Because I always have a struggle with that setting at the beginning of any novel. Is it true, the people and the brain, the way kids learn and all the multiple intelligences, is it true for even those that are big with language and have a really good imagination and words really do pop out for them? Is it true that graphic novels also feed their learning style? Like, I would think that some people just don't like graphic novels, therefore that's why they reject them. But have you found that there's certain types of learners that just reject them?
It's a good question. I think, so when I first started this, when I was working my master's thesis, and it was about this idea really. And one of the things I did for my research was I was teaching AP Lit, and I was teaching Beowolf. And I had Gareth Hines' adaptation of Beowolf, the graphic novel, which is amazing. And I offered my AP kids whether they wanted to read the graphic novel or the traditional adaptation of Beowolf. And I didn't know what I was going to get. 50-50, they split. So 50% of the kids chose the graphic novel, 50% of the kids chose the traditional adaptation. And the scores were really close to identical on the way they wrote about it and the quizzes they took and everything, really close. But the kids who read the graphic novel, I think, spent on average something like, off the top of my head, I don't remember the exact number, but something like 3.2 hours less reading the piece. So they spent all this time less reading. Those kids who picked the traditional text, some of them thought they didn't like comics or graphic novels because they had never read one before. I often get, when we read a class set of a graphic novel or a book, I often get students who will tell me, I had no idea I enjoyed reading this. I had no idea. I had this one girl once, we read the Spiderman graphic novel, and she was just like, this is amazing. I had no idea that this was out there and I want more. And I would just give her more books to read, more books to read. There are some students who it's just not for them. I mean, that's like all of us, right? There's something that's just, I mean, country music ain't for me.
Yeah.
Like I can appreciate it. I can understand why people like it, but it's just not for me.
Exactly.
And if somebody assigned a country album for me to analyze in a class, I wouldn't necessarily choose that. But yeah, I think it goes down to, you know, your passion and your excitement for something. The kids will be more into it. And plus it's still new. It's still, even though teachers are using these books for like 10 years now, almost, it's still relatively new in the classroom. So teachers have the advantage of just being different than other English teachers or social studies teachers or science teachers, if they're trying something like this.
I think you said a couple key things. You were passionate. That's contagious. And second thing too, you said that you kept throwing more books at them. And that is key as well. During remote teaching though, how have you adapted to the fact that you can't just throw a book at a kid? We're not with them. So how have you adapted this whole, I know you have a YouTube channel. That's been helpful, right?
Yeah, and getting books to kids though, like it is tough. It is tough to do. So I knew going into this semester that we were reading these like 2 books. So when we had all the materials pick up, they took these 2 graphic novels home with them from the beginning of the year. And I had a packet of comic books that I had ready for them to go. So generally, I'm somebody who likes to plan last minute because I don't know what's happening in my class dated. I can't plan for next month. Like I can't do that. Like I don't know how I'm going to be feeling, how the kids are going to be feeling.
Yep.
I have this epiphany that's not to sound like, you know, like not to sound like crazy or anything, but I don't know how I'm going to feel next month. And I don't want to commit to something because I feel like I need to commit to it. But I had to commit to these couple books because we were going to be remote. There was one optional book that I allowed the kids to do. And I had to find, the school library had like 5 books that had 6 copies of each. So I was able to give them the choice of which one they wanted to read. And then they came to pick up that book that they wanted to read. So they got to choose it, come pick it up. Some of the kids already had a copy of a book. Some of them went to their local library and got it. Some of them had it digitally. So they just read it on Comixology or they got it from Amazon. So yeah, but there was an option for the kids to come pick up the book. And if they didn't want to come to school, or they couldn't come to school, I found a way to get them a title that they would be interested in. But it is much more difficult in the social distance climate to get kids, because I have a lending library in my classroom of probably over 400 graphics, novels, and comics that the kids can just take whenever they want. They don't have that luxury now, which kind of sucks.
Yeah, that's the hard part. Even in blended, it's not going to be, you can't even touch the books now. So it's like the same. You also said something about, how you don't really plan ahead. You just sort of don't know how you're going to feel, which makes sense, right? Because our instruction today is supposed to inform our instruction tomorrow, right? So it is hard to just plan it out. I agree with you on that. Do you also teach literary expression still?
I'll have this semester, I taught literary expressions last year, and I didn't teach it first semester this year, but I have two sections coming up this semester.
Tell me, because I taught that the first year, and I had tell me, what are you doing with literary expressions now?
Well, I love that DaVinci book that is like the base of that class and all of those chapters. And that's the thing too, like without having, I don't think I need to get that entire book to those kids for the semester. It's good if I can have a class set in the room that I can distribute and we can read chapters or paragraphs and then collect them all back. So I think I'll be kind of sharing a lot of that stuff through the learning management system. But a lot of the things we did in that class last year were very tactile. So it's all about like expressing, reading short things, a lot of poetry. We did this one thing where this was kind of, I was on a weekend and I went to the grocery store and Oreos was doing this contest. And it was like, here's these package of Oreos. We're not telling you what the flavor is because you got to guess the flavor. And it was a contest. And if you could guess the flavor, you would be entered into a drawing to win like $50,000. So I bought like 2 packages of these Oreos. I was like, oh, this is amazing. And I brought them into class and I gave each kid 2 Oreos. And I was like, we don't know the flavor of these Oreos. I said, but we're going to analyze and we're going to write about why we think this flavor is what it is. So I want you to like taste it, write down the textures, write down the flavors, smell it. What are you smelling? And it was this idea of teaching the kids how to write about food in a way, but also how to write about details and expressions. And by the end of the period, all they were doing was arguing with each other over what the flavor of this Oreo was. And I like to do little things like that that really get them maybe writing in ways that they hadn't written before, thinking about things that they hadn't thought about before, because those are the things that, you know, by this point in their schooling, want to teach them a little bit more about other types of writing that are out there. It's not always just a 5-paragraph essay.
Oh,
Sometimes
please. Don't even get me
your career, wherever you land, you're probably not going to be writing 5-paragraph essays. So
exactly.
let's get writing other things.
Yes. And that's your teaching literary expressions for people don't know is how to think like a genius. And activating the senses is a big part of that, which is a perfect segue, unless you have more to say about comics, into veganism, which is also a topic I want to get into with you.
You know, I could talk about comics for like 8 hours. So
I know.
You transition whenever you need to transition.
Yeah. And you are the other comic teacher. I want to give credit to Ronell, Whitaker, right? He's the comic teacher. I think it's funny how you played on that.
Teacher.com, and I'm the other comicbookteacher.com. And when we were creating our websites because we started, him and I presented our first conference together in NCTE Vegas, like 8-10 years ago now at this point. I don't know how long ago it was. And we just been in the trenches ever since together. And he bought the comicbookteacher.com. And I was like, well, I'm buying the other comic book teacher.
The domain name, that's hilarious.
At one point, we even had business cards where his information was on one side and mine was on the other. Like that's
I love that.
How much we worked together.
I love that. One thing before we segue into veganism too, you said parents were thanking you for getting their kids excited about reading. And I wanted to say, when I thought about this, boys often don't like to read because they perceive it as a feminine activity because mom would read to them or whatever. But one of the statistics I remember, and I'll put the research in the notes, that if a father in the home is reading, just sitting there reading, not even nagging the kid, reading themselves, and you see dad reading, you're sure that your son or daughter, your son, it's mainly, I'm thinking about the boys, they're going to read too. So kudos to you for getting people excited about reading. I want to transition into veganism because it kind of connects to a situationship that I'm in. You just asked my guests for situationships, but it goes back to the issues I'm having with health. So I tried the vegan. I've been actually off sugar for 7 days, and I was a vegan yesterday all day. And again, I just did it because I watched the Game Changers on Netflix, just thinking, I'm going to talk to Eric tomorrow. I think it'd be good to learn a little bit more about vegetarianism. Holy cow, it's life changer. It's all about these world-class athletes that went to plant-based diet, and talk about, I have a list of things that it can do to help. And then maybe we could talk about like some of I know on your Instagram, you're showing all your recipes, but what made you decide to go vegan?
So the one you're talking about, is that the documentary that was with the forks over knives people?
No, but I saw that one a long time ago, and I remember thinking, oh, this is good, but I should have watched it again. No, the Game Changers, it's called The Game Changers, just about these world-class athletes that decided to go vegan or vegetarian, I don't even, just plant-based, because of all the benefits. And I'll read some of the benefits. I have a list here, but I first want to hear your story of why you decided to go.
Yeah, it's like 3 steps, right? And anybody who is interested in kind of exploring that path, I think I inadvertently found the path for me. And that was 2 years ago, I had my first flare up of gout. And I had gout, which is like an inflammation, and it usually happens either in your ankle or your big toe, usually, and one foot. So mine is my right foot, and it generally is, you can get it at any time if you have it, but there are triggers for it. And sugary drinks, meat, generally beef and seafood, and alcohol. I don't drink a lot. I've never really considered myself a big drinker at all. So to kind of like cut down on alcohol was like not a thing for me anyway, because I didn't really drink much. The thing I was eating a lot of was red meat and I would eat a lot of shrimp, and I would like seafood sometimes, you know, not a big fish guy, but I would eat seafood. So I had a flare up of gout on New Year's Day 2 years ago. And I said, no, I went to the hospital. Like it was that bad. And I was like, no more of this. So at that point, 2 years ago, I cut out beef and seafood. I said, I don't need to eat these things anymore. If they're going to make me feel like this, I'm done. And that was, I mean, as somebody who owns like 4 hamburger cookbooks, that was pretty tough for me. But I was like, you know what? I don't need it because I have chicken, I have pork.
How quickly did you see the symptoms go away then?
Well, see, gout, like you get a flare up and then you take some medicine and then it eventually goes away, right? And then it'll come back. So if you adhere to like these things that keep it away, it comes back less. So since I've given up red meat and fish, and I don't do sugary drinks and much alcohol, I've had 1 or 2 small flare-ups, but nowhere near as bad as that first one was. And I mean, that New Year's Eve, that New Year's Day, like I went all out. Like I was eating veal meatballs. I was like, it was like, back to like, I know exactly why it happened. I was just being gross with what I was eating.
Yeah.
So that was a year. That was a year of no beef and no seafood. And then last Christmas, my wife and I were talking and we're like, we're so close to just not eating meat anymore. Why don't we, because we love animals. I'm like, why don't we just like stop eating meat? Like, let's just go vegetarian. So a year ago on Christmas, we went vegetarian and it wasn't as hard at all as I thought I was going to be. And like, I don't know, I was raised Catholic. So like you wouldn't eat meat on Fridays in Lent, but you could still eat like fish and stuff. And like the sacrifice of giving up like meat 1 day a week for 6 weeks, it's just ridiculous. When you think
it was actually, the reason they did that was to promote the meat, the fish weight. It was an economic reason of why the Catholics did that too, because I was raised Catholic too. It wasn't even anything to do with being spiritual, but it does. I mean, to take away being fasting and denying yourself. I get it. It's a good thing.
My mom's happy that I don't eat meat on Fridays in Lent now, but I don't eat meat any day. So
well, I got to tell you, when you just mentioned, like, I was going to ask you this, your wife was on board 2 years ago, or just, to me, okay, when one partner changes the habit in the relationship and you're both used to like imbibing or you're used to eating, and then one changes, there's like, could be like a rift there too, right? So I love that she's on board with this whole lifestyle too. Was it because of your gout that she got on board, or was she more on board with that kind of living before that?
Yeah, I think it was just because like she just like, I don't really like beef anyway. Like, I mean, of course we all liked steaks and everything, but it was like not having it didn't really affect us as much as we thought we were going to.
Yeah.
So she was fine with that. And then when we went from that to vegetarian last year, she was ready. Like she was ready to say, look, we need to start making these changes. We really started seeing, so here's the deal. Like I watched the documentary, I think it was that Forks Over Knives one. And there was a dude in that documentary, and this might, there were 2 moments, I can tell you quick stories here. There were 2 moments I think that really pushed me into vegetarianism before I get to veganism. One of them was in that documentary, there was like this like really swole, like ex-military dude who now works as an anti-poacher in, I think it was in Africa. And he works with this group of guys that like hunts down people that are like poaching and killing elephants.
The Game Changers also brings that up.
That might be, maybe I'm talking about the same one here. And the dude says, so tell me if this is, the dude says, I can't logically spend my life defending these animals and then going home and eating a hamburger.
That's from the Game Changers, I think. Okay,
so that was probably the one I saw. And when he said that, I was like, a light clicked, and I was like, how can I sit here, love my dog, and like donate money to the ASPCA and help all these animals and try to and feel terrible every time I see an animal suffering, and then just eat a hamburger?
Yeah.
Like cows are smarter, like cows are loving, and pigs are smarter than dogs. I'm like, I can't do this. Like I can't justify it anymore because something tastes good for 15 minutes. That does not justify killing this thing to me. So we stopped eating meat. And that Christmas was rough because all the family just started making fun of us, of course, like South Side, yes. You have to eat meat because this is what we've done for hundreds of years because it works out so well for societies, right?
Yeah.
And then 3 months ago, the beginning of I don't remember, 3 months ago, I think it was.
No, November.
I don't remember when it was. We've been vegan for 3 months. So we said, I think it's because then we read Eating Animals, this book, Eating Animals, Jonathan Safran-Foer, I think Safran-Foer, I think is his name. I'm drawing a blank right now, but we read that book, and it's basically about the industrial farming of animals. And a lot of it had to do with like the dairy industry as well. And we're like, we're done. I can't give my money or my time anymore to this industry that is doing all of these terrible things to my body, to the environment, to animals. Like you don't need to do it. Like we just don't need to do it. And I've gotten a lot of blowback from people because this is anti everything that they've ever learned and everything that advertisements have ever told us, that we need to drink milk and eat cheese, which we don't need to. But anyway, that book pushed us. That was pushing us into being vegan. And ever since then, it's just becoming like small steps to be better at life through veganism, right?
Yes. It sounds very hippy dippy, right? And using your words, but really it's beyond that. And actually, my favorite university as of late has been TikTok. So I went into TikTok last night, and I went on to typed in the search vegetarianism, or I don't even think I typed in vegan. Came across some really artistic people that, one, namely, I'll put her in the notes. I think it's the Korean vegan. She tells a story about her dad as she's cooking. And it's a beautiful art form, just watching her. So I followed her. She's a lawyer in Chicago. And then some kids said, hey, do you know you can just boil up pecans and it's going to be similar to beef? Have you tried that? That's another one. I mean, there's some ideas, and I know you've got some recipes, and for me, the reasons I never wanted to go vegan or anything like that is because it felt too restrictive. And then social gatherings. Well, now I'm not going any, so it's cool time to start. And then another thing is with ADD, I have a hard time following recipes and the details of that, and the mess the kitchen makes. Again, it goes back to the mess of the art classroom, right? So I have a hard time with that. But let me read some benefits that it says here. You're going to save your heart. Number one, they did it in the Game Changers. I don't know if they said that they went to Brooklyn to this firehouse. 65% of firefighters die of heart attacks. And I know that's the number one killer in the US, isn't it? Heart disease. So it helps with that. Also, another thing I thought about, I always thought that it would cost more money to be a vegan. Have you noticed your money, you made more? Does it stretch the dollar, or is it about equal because you're not buying meat?
Well, a lot of the substitutes that I buy are a little bit pricier than the originals, right? So like you could do it on a budget for sure, but like I get this stuff called Just Egg, which is like an egg substitute, and we do buy a decent amount of like fake meat, like plant-based meats,
Yeah.
I try to find sales and deals when I can. Like if Jewel has a buy two get one free, I'll go buy like 9 packages of the meat and I'll store it. But it can get a little pricey for those things. But I mean, like you'd be surprised how many of the things that you normally eat that are just like bagels are vegan. Most of the bread we eat is vegan. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we generally would just eat is vegan. Oreos.
Yep. Nice. I didn't realize that. Also, I want to read a couple more. It gives your body a spring cleaning. Have you noticed besides the gout is getting better, did you notice that just everything got better?
Oh, for sure.
Inflammation down.
I immediately lost like 10 pounds. Like within a month, I lost 10 pounds. I've plateaued a little bit, but I think it's because I still eat a lot of sugar. Like there's still tons of sugary things you can eat when you're vegan, which I'm trying to cut back on as well. But no, I like, that feeling like when you eat a meal and you just feel like after Thanksgiving and you're just stuffed and gross.
Yes.
I don't feel that anymore.
Yes. I didn't feel that yesterday. So I'm like, one day I'm a believer.
Yeah, I didn't feel so. We had a vegan Thanksgiving, and I had this massive plate of food. We made all of these wonderful things, everything plant-based, 100%. And I ate this big plate of food, and afterwards I was like, I feel great. Like I feel like I need to sit down in front of it. I felt amazing, and that was things for me too.
Your palate is more entertained, I would think. People think the opposite. I think with vegetarian life, the palate is more exciting, just like you do with your teaching. I think there's a connection between what you do with comics in the classroom and vegan lifestyle. It's very similar.
You know what? Here's something that I've equated to. It's like I'm 43 now, and for my entire life, I've eaten these things. I've eaten meat and cheese and dairy, and this entire life has been this thing. Now I'm getting into this veganism and vegetarianism, and I'm cooking from cookbooks and recipes with ingredients that I never knew existed, and I'm cooking things that I never knew was possible. Like, I've just discovered like a whole new way of eating now at 43 years old. Like, I'm excited. This is a whole new adventure for me now. And part of me, and teaching's the same way too, part of me wonders why people are just okay with doing the same thing their entire life and not wanting to be adventurous and try new things. If it can be better for you, for the environment, for animals, and you just have a whole new adventure at your disposal, why not? Like, life is short, you know?
I agree. And I'm telling you, I also on this research, I had a little sciatic nerve issues this year, and vegetarianism is supposed to help back problems as well. So I will report back to you when I see you again, because this is amazing. Also, it goes into other health issues. I'm telling you guys, I'm going to put this in the notes, but I'm just so excited. I thought, oh, I'll just do a little research on this. And man, you made me a convert.
I'm telling you, I do feel a lot better now that I'm not eating those things. And the ice cream, Ben & Jerry's makes an amazing dairy-free ice cream. So I don't even really miss ice cream because it's so good.
Yes. All right. Before we get into our rapid fire questions, can I contribute to your Finer Things Club? If you want to mention what you just started this year, I think it's so great. I want to give you some suggestions for books and movies to watch and stuff. But tell us about that.
So over quarantine, it was like a couple weeks into quarantine, I'm in this group of like teachers that all teach with like comics and graphic novels, and we've become like really good friends. So we're on this text message together, and we missed each other. We wanted to check in to see how everybody was doing. And somebody suggested, why don't we get together? So we got together over Zoom. And then it was, hey, let's do this next week too, since we're all quarantined, but let's talk about this graphic novel. And then it became, okay, well, let's meet next week. We'll talk about this graphic novel, this movie, and this podcast, or this album. And then every week the next person would pick the three things. We'd have homework, and then we would meet, and we would have this like social, we pick the title from the Finer Things Club from The Office when they meet. I think it's Pam, Toby, and Oscar have this little Finer Things Club where they meet in the lunchroom and talk about a book. So we would do this. And then when summer came and people started being able to go out a little bit, we cut it down to every 2 weeks. And then when, things started ramping up with like getting closer to last school year and everything, we're doing every 3 weeks now. So every 3 weeks we meet, and this Wednesday is actually our next meeting. And we're discussing a film, which is a documentary that was on Netflix, a graphic novel, and an album. So I'm pretty excited. So yeah, we and it's cool to kind of just have like, we talk intellectually, we analyze things the way we want our kids to analyze things.
Yes.
Together as adults. So we're doing these things we're asking our kids to do, and it keeps our analysis skills sharp as well.
I think we need to write every paper those kids write. We need to read every book. We need to do all kinds of things that we're asking them to do. We need to do it. But I want to contribute. Are you a Hitchcock fan?
I am.
One of my favorites is Vertigo.
Okay. Let me tell you one thing though. In the Finer Things Club, you cannot pick you cannot pick anything anybody has ever seen or read.
Oh,
okay?
Wow.
It's really hard because a couple of the people in the group are cinephiles. Like, they've seen every movie ever. So I guarantee you they've seen every Alfred Hitchcock film.
How about
Well, I have not seen Vertigo. I guarantee at least two of those guys have seen Vertigo.
Find out. And then, have they seen Mad Men? That's my favorite TV show, because it's a very it's a 1960s ad agency, very creative stuff, very scandalous, but that's on Netflix. I want to recommend. And then if they haven't read The Awakening by Kate Chopin, I think that's a classic that's going to help you understand women in your life. And then if you want to do an album, I only listen to gospel music, but Travis Green is one of my favorites on that one.
You have a particular album?
Well, I don't. There's one, I know he has the Good and Loved album, but I haven't read the whole thing. I haven't listened to the whole thing, but there's one song of his that he fell out of a 3-story window and tells a testimony about that and how he survived and his mother's prayers. And it's like, oh, the song is amazing. And every time I need a pick me up, I'd listen to that song. So Travis Green, I bet they haven't listened to him. I bet your group hasn't listened to gospel.
You only listen to gospel?
Only gospel. It's powerful. It's cool. Good stuff. It's good stuff. Because I went to a lot of Black churches in my day, and I'm now just streaming online my former church in LA, and also a church in South Bend that just is on fire. So yeah, gospel music is powerful. I love it, love it, love it.
Cool. I will definitely.
That part, but, yeah. Let's go in our rapid fire questions. And, what is something that people often get wrong about you?
I don't know. What is something people get wrong about me?
Because you know how people try to put people in a certain niche or a niche, and they're like, well, he's that guy. But wait a minute, you don't know this about me.
I guess that's a really good question. I there's probably a couple things, but like, I think people do assume, and people have approached me with this before, that I am such a champion of comics and graphic novels in the classroom that I don't think that traditional books and novels have a place, and that I think that all books should be replaced with comics and graphic novels. Like, that's so not true. And I say that as much as I possibly can. But when people hear how much I talk about the benefit of those things, they feel like, well, you don't read real books. I'm like, no, I do. I just also read these things, and I have an open mind to appreciate all of these things. And I think also too, because I have like tattoos, I think in the past too, people assume you are a certain way if you have tattoos too sometimes, you know, and I kind of fall into, with the hair and the beard, sometimes people do think like they assume that I'll eat meat because I look like all the chefs that are cutting meat with my tattoos and stuff on Instagram or on Twitter or whatever. So they do assume that. And a lot of my friends, like, I owned, up until 6-7 months ago, I owned 2 smokers. Like, I would go on road trips my wife and I would go on road trips to barbecue restaurants. I mean, that was 3 years ago, you know? So I think people who haven't, my even friends who haven't seen me in a while, probably have no idea how much I've changed in the past year. I mean, the past 4 months, I've changed tremendously, you know, physically, mentally, emotionally. I mean, life is just,
I think 2020 was meant to do that for many people. And I love that it's reset you as well. And also, if people think that eating meat or not eating meat is not a manly, virile thing to do, the Game Changer also addresses that. But you need to watch the Game Changers if you don't think it's manly to be a vegan, right?
It's pretty rough, the amount of time. I got attacked on Twitter a couple times from male teachers who were like, oh, and by the way, I eat meat. Like, okay. Yeah, that says more about you than it does about me. So,
all right, the snapshot of an ordinary moment that brings you joy.
Snapshot of an ordinary moment. That would be maybe sitting in a nice chair at home with a cup of coffee and a good graphic novel.
Nice. And your dog on your feet.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't want to embellish. All right, what makes you lose track of time?
Art, drawing. So when I draw, or if I'm writing music, because I write lyrics sometimes, and when I'm writing lyrics, or if I'm drawing, I totally 2 hours will go by and I won't even recognize it.
There you go. Like, we're in the rapid fire right now, but you just proved that why you don't fit into one niche, right? With the knowledge you have now of remote teaching from last semester, what are you going to do differently this semester?
I think this semester is going to be more leaning into utilizing the chat in more productive ways. I think I had a couple classes last semester. My comics class last semester was really, really into having fun conversations in the chat, even while class was going on. And I think that's something that, like, we didn't have when we were in person. When we have a full like that is a thing that doesn't exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is no class chat that the kids are having, but in the chat is really interesting dynamic that I think I'm going to miss when we go back to fully in school learning with no remote anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Teachers are going to realize the value of, because this is a form of communication that students have been using for years that adults have not been as much as they have. And to really lean into how can I use the chat to engage and just have more fun in this really crappy situation.
What did you love about 2020? I know so many people hated it. What is one thing you did love?
I loved that I discovered more about myself, and I loved that I got to, start this Finer Things Club with my friends and have these really in-depth intellectual conversations that I would not have had if we weren't stuck in the house together with just ourselves, So I think there's a lot of, I would say, personal growth. I've had a lot of personal growth this year. If the pandemic wasn't here, I wouldn't have had.
I know. Agree. Did you want to do a 3, 2, 1?
I can do that.
Okay. All right. Can you give me 3 vegan dishes that you've cooked that you recommend, 2 comic or graphic novels that you recommend, and then 1 TV show that we must watch?
Absolutely. So vegan stuff, if you're looking to get into vegan cooking, you really need to fall in love with chickpeas, because chickpeas are, they're in hummus, they're in falafel, chickpeas are in a lot of things. So last night I made fresh falafel from scratch for the first time, and I really enjoy falafel, and it was amazing. So I would recommend trying to make some falafel. The next thing is really lean into that Mexican cookbook, because really, if you take cheese out of a lot of those Mexican dishes, you can substitute mushroom for most meat. So like mushroom poblano tacos have been our go-to, and they're really easy to make. So you can find some amazing vegan taco recipes, because all the tortillas are all vegan too, right? So lean into that Mexican cuisine. And then the third thing I would recommend making is go onto YouTube and look up how to make Neapolitan pizza crust, because most pizza crust, if you didn't know, is vegan. You can order pizza from Pizza Hut without the cheese, and if there's no meat on it, it's a vegan pizza. But the Neapolitan pizza crust that you can make at home is super, super, super good. And one of the things that I've discovered over 2020 is the only reason we need so much cheese on our pizza is because the crust sucks. The crust is brilliant. You don't even miss the cheese. So I would say lean into making Neapolitan pizza dough, that Mexican cookbooks, and get some awesome tacos in your repertoire. And then love chickpeas. The 2 graphic novels that I would recommend to you, just for somebody who's looking to read an interesting graphic novel or comics, if you haven't read many or any at all, there's a book by Here. It's called Here, Here, and that's by Richard McGuire, I believe it is. I'm almost positive. That book is just fantastic. There's not many words in it. It just takes place like here, wherever here is, in the span of like hundreds of thousands of years. So what was going on in this one moment on the planet over the course of hundreds and thousands of years, and it jumps from like 1200 to 2315 to 1987, and all of the things that were happening in this one moment on the planet throughout time. Brilliant book. And then the second graphic novel I would recommend just for fun is Scott Pilgrim versus the World. It's just called Scott Pilgrim. That's the movie, Scott Pilgrim versus the World. Scott Pilgrim is a series from Oni Press about this early group of early 20s people just trying to figure out who they are, and they have a band, and it's super fun. Brian Lee O'Malley wrote, and there's a colored version. It was originally in black and white. I would get the hardcover color version. And then the TV show I'll throw out to you is one that I just binged season 3 on New Year's Day. That's Cobra Kai. So anybody who is a fan of old school Karate Kid, all of those movies, if you have not watched Cobra Kai, there are 3 seasons on Netflix right now. It has no right being as good as it is.
Wow. Eric, you're such a plethora of knowledge and passion, and I appreciate having you as a guest, and I appreciate this time together. So we can find you at
theothercomicbookteacher.com, and then on social media, I'm at comics_teacher, and my YouTube channel is just youtube.com/comicsteacher.
Beautiful. I'll put it all in the notes. So everybody, just so you know, if you want to find him, he's worth finding. So thank you again. No, thank you so much for your time.